Martin. In Polish, it's Marcin. So a lot of Martins in Xamarin. And we are happy to talk with you about Uno platform, what it can do, how to start with it, and yeah, all for you.
Thank you, thank you. So I will probably make it more interactive as I have just these slides, but I want to give you time for some Q&A and whatever you want to know. So I will be happy to answer. So if I can start, I will start with the slides and then we will get to some demos and such. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Awesome. So, all right. So the topic of our talk will be cross-platform application development, which is a very complex thing, as you probably know, as you are Xamarin developers. So you have experience with building applications for multiple platforms. And the classic way of building these applications in the past was to build native application for each of the platforms you want to target. So if you want to do a desktop application, you will go with Windows and you will build C# code with XAML UI. With Android, you go with Kotlin and build a XML. With iOS, you use Swift and Swift UI. And for web, you go with JavaScript, HTML, CSS combination. So this means you have to have 4 different teams, because no developer can possibly know all these in a very proficient manner, and you have to fix things 4 times. You have to implement features 4 times. It's a lot of duplication and a lot of annoying and useless things you have to do to just make the application work everywhere and keep all these in sync. So this is not the ideal solution. The better way is to have a single language to cover the business logic and then have platform-specific UI. This is possible if you use C# as the native language, and then you build UWP application with XAML, Android with XML, and Xamarin Android, and the same with Xamarin iOS. And finally, for web, you can now use Blazor to write your business logic in C# and just display it with HTML and CSS. So you avoid those platform-specific business logic languages, but you still have to duplicate your UI, which is good if you want to have a really native look of your application everywhere. But it's also a little bit inconvenient, as you have to write it multiple times, and it's a bit harder to make your branding consistent across all these platforms. So what can we do? We can go to Xamarin.Forms, which is probably the first platform which achieved the way to share all code across all platforms, which means you have just one language, which is C# and one language for UI, which is XAML, and you use those across all the platforms. The little issue with Xamarin.Forms is you have a custom XAML dialect, so developers who are proficient in WPF or UWP aren't familiar with those nuances, like with and with request differences, and background is now background color, and it's just a simple color, and so on. So there are some differences which you have to get used to when you come from the Windows background. And Xamarin.Forms goes in the path of using native UI on all platforms. So when you launch the same XAML on Android, iOS, and Windows, you get different result. It looks native, and that's probably what you want if you want a really native experience. But if you want to introduce some company branding, for example, then you will have to write some custom renderers to just make, for example, buttons look the same everywhere, or make the margins the same, and so on. So while you get quick results and good results quickly, it might take much more time to make the application really consistent everywhere. Of course, the Xamarin.Forms team has acknowledged this and created the Xamarin.Forms shell and material design, which is a huge step forward and makes the applications look the same on Android and iOS. But the problem here is that they kind of dropped the UWP support, and if you want to your application on the desktop too, you are in a bad place, as you can't yet use a lot of those new features in UWP. While there are some community efforts to do this, it's pretty clear that Xamarin.Forms team is currently focusing on Android and iOS, and the other platforms are kind of second fault. So can we do better? Can we actually as well target the web with our application and share all our code? The answer is coming from Uno platform, which is a new approach. It's a free open source framework which is available on GitHub, and it features its main goal is help you write one single code base that targets all the platforms at once. And the nice thing about it is it's a port of the UWP APIs to all 8 other platforms. So developers who are familiar with Windows will be really easy. It will be very easy for them to work with Uno platform, and even easy to port existing applications to other platforms. So how does it work? When we compare the UI, as I've shown the example UI in Xamarin.Forms, this is the same UI built in Uno platform. So you can see just a simple grid, border, and so on. When we launch this application on Android and iOS and WebAssembly, you can see the application looks exactly the same. There are no differences. The spacings and UI controls look exactly the same. So just using the simple XAML syntax, you get the same experience everywhere. And this means we achieved this way the goal of having one single code base, including code and UI. And to just compare how and see how it works, we have to look at the architecture level and see how Uno platform fits there. So in case of Windows, you get just your UWP APIs and application code, and there is no Uno platform layer there. So you can see there is just direct connection to UWP layer. In case of Android and iOS, there is Mono in the bottom. On top of it is Xamarin, not Xamarin.Forms, but Xamarin, which provides the native bindings to native APIs. And on top of it is Uno platform, which uses UIKit and Android UI to render its controls. But those controls are rendered using the low-level rendering APIs, not the full controls, which is the difference from Xamarin.Forms. In case of web, the Uno platform is using HTML, CSS, and it's rendering its controls using those. And these are just some prerequisites. I will just skip this, as I will show you later. For the demo, I will show you how to build a simple Uno platform application, and then I will show you some nice things about it. So I've just created a simple Hello World application here. It's basically what you get when you do a new project and type Uno platform. You get this cross-platform app Uno platform template. And to get this template, you actually need to install the extension, which is available here. You go to the online tab, you type Uno platform, and there we should have it here. So this is the Uno platform solution templates. You just install this, and if you have if you have pre-installed Xamarin Android and iOS, then you should be able to build Uno platform applications. So when you create a new application, you get this layout, which is very familiar to Xamarin.Forms developers. We have the Android, iOS, and UWP head, and in addition the WebAssembly head for targeting the web. Finally, you have the shared project, which is something you don't usually see in current Xamarin.Forms applications, but there is a very nice reason for that. Because you have here the shared XAML files and also assets. And the reason for having the shared project here is that you can even share the images which you are using in your application, and Uno platform actually automatically takes care of copying those assets into the platform specific projects. So when you build your application and have, for example, multiple scales of different images, Uno platform recognizes those scales and copies them into, for example, resources, drawables, XHDP, and so on. Okay, so let's go to, I will first run the application just to show you how it looks. It's just a simple hello world, and it's just UWP, so there's nothing special about it. You know, you have just your UWP XAML. You can build some controls. For example, let's do a slider with a name, and then we will edit some minimum, which will be 0, maximum 100. Let's add some padding so it's nicer. And then we can do things like binding to the slider. Slider path value. So this way I will make this a stack panel so it's on top of each other. And if I launch this now, we should see that the slider, when we move the slider, it reacts to the text box shows the value. Yeah. So this is very simple UI. And now let's see what happens when we launch the same thing on Android, for example. Now, Android basically references the shared project, and it contains the references to Uno UI. Now let's launch it. You can see the Android project is very simple. There is just a main application and main activity that's deriving from Windows UI XAML application activity, which is Uno platform specific thing, which actually provides those bindings to Uno platform and makes your application work. Right, should get it launched. And now we have the same experience. As you can see, sliding works and the value changes. And as you can see, it's the same design as well. So it's basically exactly the same thing. And for iOS, it will be very similar as long as the remote emulator works. Again, on iOS, it's just a main file which launches the application. Nothing special there. Okay, it's launching. So again, the same experience. Here we have the notch, which is obscuring the UI. There is a simple way to fix this. Uno platform provides a behavior which you can attach to the page, which makes sure that no notches can obscure UI. But in this case, I didn't add it, so it's there. Yeah, but you can see the slider works the same way and the binding still works. Okay. And finally, the most exciting thing is the web. And the WebAssembly part of GNU platform works on top of Mono and WebAssembly, which runs your application code within the browser. So your C# code is directly running in the browser, and it's actually running all on the client. So I will just refresh this. You can see that the network, it downloads a lot of very specific .NET things like system core and so on, and among those are UI and so on. So this is all the assets which are downloaded to the client, and then no additional network requests are happening. And when I slide this, you can see the same experiences here. Yeah, so there are no additional requests. Now the nice thing about GNU platform is it has a lot of integration into the native platform. So when I will do something fun here. I will change my system theme to dark. And after I did this, when I launch the browser, you will see some difference. You can see the application is now in dark mode. And I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to change any XAML, as UWP comes with dark theming, and GNU platform has those themes as well. So your application automatically adapts to dark and light theme of the system. And this works exactly the same on Android and iOS as well. Okay. GNU platform as well supports hot reload and hot restart. I actually don't have it functional here yet because I have a very greedy antivirus. So I can show it to you at least on a sample. I have a video done here. Should be here. So hot reload. Yeah. So when you have your application running, you can actually change the UI at runtime, and it actually reloads even in the browser. And it allows even for more drastic changes, like here when I add render transform and save it, it should rotate the button here. So when I enter some text, it's rendering the button rotated, and it's all running in the browser, which is very cool and very useful, as you can easily debug your code and improve your UI at runtime, even on those platforms like Android, iOS, and WebAssembly. And GNU platform actually allows you to go even further, as on the GNU platform repo, you can find a link to Gitpod, which allows you to launch the GNU platform solution itself in the browser and even make contributions to WebAssembly code directly in the browser. So you can launch the samples application, you can do hot reload in the browser, and you don't have to install anything, not even Visual Studio. So you can definitely try this out, and it works best in New Edge and Chrome browsers. Okay. One more thing I want to show you is the adaptive UI, as that's probably one of the biggest advantages of GNU platform, as it can easily adapt to multiple screen sizes. And I've noticed Xamarin.Forms has actually added this functionality lately as well. It's the adaptive triggers, which allow you to specify the main window width, and then it automatically adapts to the window as it runs. So I've launched this in WebAssembly. You have the main page. I have Visual State Manager here, which has a normal view, a wide view, and I have two different layout controls. One is a grid, which shows items in a grid layout, and one is a list view, which shows the list of items. And I've lost the window here. So the default view is the grid, so you can see it reflows normally, and when the window is narrow, it gets into the list layout this way. So it works even in the browser as well, automatically reacting to the defined stop points in your styles. Right.
Sorry, I have a question right now.
Yeah, definitely.
If the same measures will work in Android, because there could have a specialty with split screen, will the demo works that as well?
Yes, it does. I can show it to you here. It runs like this by default when you rotate this. Actually, for some reason, stopped running. Anyway, I'll run it again.
As usual in demo.
Yeah. That's very weird. Doesn't even show anything now. Okay. Okay, let's do it one more time. Okay, let's try this. If I do split, you can see it reflowed into the list layout.
Yeah, really nice.
So it works. If it worked with the rotation, it would, So this way it's in the grid view because it's wide enough. But it works even on iOS the same way. If you have iPad Pro, you can do the split view of your application with something else, and it will also reflow accordingly.
Great. Thank you for demo.
No problem. Okay, so let's go back to the slides for a while. To explain how this all works, it's important. Oh, you don't want this. You want to start from here. What's the button for that? From current slide. Yeah. So how it all works. You have your Windows code, which has Windows specific namespaces, of course, like Windows UI XAML controls button. But Uno Platform comes in and provides those same namespaces and same APIs as part of their package. So when you compile for UWP, it's compiling against the native Windows APIs. And in case of Android, iOS, and WebAssembly, those namespaces are provided by Uno. So it's very easy to just write your Windows code and then run it everywhere. And of course, some things are not yet supported. And for those which are not yet supported, the code actually throws not implemented exception at runtime. And even notice gives you a notice about these missing features when you code your code, as there are some Roslyn analyzers which underline the parts of code which are not implemented on specific platforms. So you always know that you have to do some platform specific code here and there. But for the UI part of things, most things just work and you don't have to do anything in addition to just writing Windows application. And for the support, you can see we have UWP supported natively as there is no Uno platform. And Android, iOS, and WebAssembly are stable. And there is a very early preview work on macOS as well. So in the future, it should be at least these 5 platforms supported. And now for a comparison to just see how what's the difference between Xamarin.Forms and Uno Platform's XAML, I've chosen the example of image button, which is a common thing you want to do when you want to display a button that has not only a text but also an image. Then in Xamarin.Forms you have a little bit problem because the button control is rendered using just the native button controls on Android and iOS, which means it has just the text as it's matching the lowest common denominator of all the platforms, and you just cannot put any custom content inside the button. And if you want to do that, you will have to probably make a derived type from button and build some custom behavior there and build some custom renderers. In case of UNO platform, the XAML is more composable, as it provides the same templatable controls as WPF or UWP. And the button control, for example, is not just a simple button. It provides the behavior of a button, but it has no look by default. The look itself is provided by a template which contains multiple different primitives which build up a button. So there is a border which provides the border and background of the button. Then there is a padding around it and so on. And inside is a content control which just displays any content. So if you put a text inside your button, it will render a text. But if you want something more advanced, you can just put any arbitrary content inside of your button and the content control will just render it. So it's a kind of a composable nature of all the controls in UNO platform. That's the advantage over having them backed directly by native controls. In this case, you can see I've put a stack panel which has a image and as well a text block. And both these are displayed then on the button, and you could put there anything if you wanted. You can put a tree view inside a button or a drop down, for example. It's all up to you. Right.
So here it have to be a container, yes, as a stack panel or something. You can't have multiple childs here.
Not multiple childs. You have to, if you want multiple childs, you have to wrap them in something. So you can put in a grid or canvas, for example, anything, any layout control will do. But you can even directly put image in there if you just want one child. That's also possible.
So content is view.
Content is a object. It actually allows you to put in anything. So if you just put in a simple class, a POCO class, it will just render the type as toString, but it's not very useful. So you can put in a content, a visual content, or you can provide a custom class and then provide a content template selector, which will select the template based on the type of the content. Yeah, so it's very customizable. Is that enough answer?
A question from me. Can you skip here definition of button.content? Because I believe this is content is a property which is direct content, yes? So if you put stack panel directly below button, it will use it as a content, yes?
Yes. I just wanted to make it clear that's the property, and its type is an object, that you can put anything there. But yes, you can just put the stack panel inside the button directly.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
Okay. So for the overview of what UNO UI provides to you, there are all the controls of UWP, data templating, styling, which are the core pieces of XAML. Then, as I mentioned, the animations and visual triggers, and also data binding, as well as XBind, which is the compiled binding support for UWP and UNO platform, which even supports things like function XBind. You can bind to a function, and you can bind to multiple sources and provide parameters for the function you are binding to, and so on. It also provides shapes and brushes, so you can set background of a control to something else than just a simple color. You can use a linear gradient brush and you can customize those. And it also supports conditional XAML. So if you want to have different UI for Android than for iOS, you can do that by using Android prefix on the XAML controls you want to have different. And it even allows you to embed native controls, as Uno UI builds on top of the native platform's views. So if you have a native control you want to use, maybe some map or some custom color picker, for example, you can just put it right into XAML and Uno platform will lay out the control inside, for example, a grid. So it's very easy to compose things from native controls into Uno platform application.
So is it possible to mix it with Xamarin.Forms, for example?
Yes, there is a way to mix it with Xamarin.Forms. I don't have it. I don't have an example here, but it is even possible to mix Uno UI with Xamarin.Forms. The same way as Xamarin.Forms embedding works, you can use the same approach in Uno UI. Yeah, so you can take your Xamarin.Forms control and like put it inside Uno application as a component. Okay, and just to add to what Uno platform provides, it's not just the UI part of things, but it's also other APIs. So if you want to build things like GPS, you have geolocator, or if you have preference, if you want to implement settings and preferences in your applications, application data, and so on. There's a lot of non-UI APIs which work exactly the same as on UWP. So you don't have to write any platform-specific code. And this is very similar to Xamarin Essentials, which provides you these as well. But in this case, you just use UWP and don't have to think about another API. So if you know UWP, then you know how to use these APIs in Uno platform as well. Okay, and a demo which shows the real power of Uno platform is the best demo is probably Uno Calculator, which this is a very interesting thing, as the Uno platform team noticed the Microsoft team from which works on Calculator, which is part of Windows. They open sourced this and allowed other people to build new features in an open source manner. So Uno platform took this code base and they just ported this to Uno platform and made it run across all the platforms they support. So this shows that the calculator application, which is on Windows, then runs on the web, as well as on iOS and Android.
Nice video.
You can download this from the store on iOS and Android, and you can run it in the browser as well. I'm not sure if calculator.uno. No, it's platform.uno. I think this is the, yeah, it should be it. Hopefully it will run now. So this is exactly the same code base as on Windows, and they actually have even this advanced features like converting mass and so on. Yeah, it's the same UI and it has all the features as on Windows, just running in the browser based on Uno. There is actually a lot of interesting things about this, and the Uno platform team has written a blog post about how they ported the Uno the calculator to Uno platform, so it's worth checking out. The biggest problem was porting the native C++ code which was there, but otherwise they just, for the XAML part and for the Windows specific things, they just took the APIs, copy paste, and it basically worked. So this is a pretty cool example of how powerful it can be. And as you can see, it even works with the resizing properly, like this numpad moves here in a different layout. So yeah, so this is pretty good example. You can get it on your phone as well, and especially for iPad, it's probably the best calculator application that's available there. You can definitely try. Okay. For the libraries, there is a lot of libraries that already support Uno platform, and there is direct support for reactive UI. Prism has an in-progress pull request which will bring native support for Uno platform, and MVVM Cross as well. Uno platform supports Lottie animations. This is actually supported on all platforms already, which means iOS, Android, WebAssembly, and macOS, and allows running Lottie animations, controlling them, rewinding them, and everything. And there is also support for Skia Sharp, which is super cool, as you can run Skia Sharp applications in the browser now. So you can render advanced things like 3D rotation and so on in the browser. Yeah, so even if you just want to build some UI for your web application, you can use this as the basis. As Skia Sharp is very powerful, and having it in the browser is very nice thing. Yeah, so it has a lot of features. Okay, and there is also coming support from Syncfusion and Telerik. And finally, there are forks for many different libraries like Windows Community Toolkit, Windows State Triggers, and so on. These are basically forks which Uno platform made to just compile those libraries against Uno UI instead of the Windows APIs. So basically you reference this Uno platform specific NuGet package, which is something like uno.windows community toolkit, for example, and you just work with it like it was the native UWP library. Right. And finally, for Xamarin.Forms developers, there is a very nice thing from Uno platform as well. If you want to take your existing Xamarin.Forms application and run it on the web, because Uno platform noticed that Xamarin.Forms uses UWP renderers to render UWP applications. So they thought, why don't we just take those renderers, compile them against Uno, and then run it in the browser? So they did it, and the result is that you can actually very easily take your Xamarin.Forms application and run it in the browser. So this is actually this master detail sample application from Xamarin.Forms. And as you can see, it's running in the browser under WebAssembly. And it's very easy to just add the head by this command .NET new wasm exif head. And you just have to install the Uno platform templates. And when you do so, then just run this command inside of your Xamarin.Forms applications root folder, and it will add a WebAssembly head, which facilitates this Uno UI rendering on WebAssembly. Okay. So finally, for what's coming in the future, the biggest piece of work which is now in progress is WinUI alignment, as Microsoft will be releasing WinUI 3 5.0, which will be the open source version of UWP UI. And Uno Platform is currently hard at work at porting the existing open source WinUI controls like tree view and so on, which will be part of this. And when WinUI is open source, they will be able to copy and paste basically, not really copy and paste because WinUI is C++, but copy and rewrite to C# to add all the native controls from WinUI and to work exactly the same as in WinUI. So once this is done, you will be sure that when you do some custom layout, it will lay out the same way in Uno Platform as in UWP, which is now sometimes a problem, for example, for relative panel, which is a very complex control. There are some nuances, in which case UWP renders a bit differently than Uno Platform, but WinUI alignment will make sure that this will work exactly the same everywhere. And another thing that's in progress is macOS support, which will be basically the same way application working in macOS as well. And I have a little sneak peek here. This is the phone word sample which I showed in the beginning of the talk. It's very early preview, but you can see it's already getting there. The text box is a little bit broken, but otherwise, the UI looks the same. So there is a lot to look forward to. And finally, for WebAssembly, there is threading support and AOT in progress, but those are a little bit dependent on WebAssembly evolving itself. So once new features are added to WebAssembly, Uno Platform immediately implements those and adds support for new things. So as WebAssembly improves, Uno Platform will as well. Okay, so now something you can try out. This playground.platform.uno website allows you to try Uno Platform in the browser without even installing anything. So you can see it here as XAML editor, which you can edit XAML in the browser, and it refreshes here. So if I do, for example, foreground red, it will change here. So we can try a lot of the Uno Platform controls and see how everything works in the browser. Okay. And you can notice here that Uno Platform even provides you with native styles. So if you use this static resource iOS button style, you get a button which is styled as in the iOS. So if you want native look on each of the platforms you are supporting, you can definitely do that. There's nothing stopping you from providing native look on each platform. And you can do so easily using platform-specific XAML. Okay. And finally, for homework time, you can try your Uno Platform by going to platform.uno, and you can check out the link in the bottom to create your first Uno Platform application. And definitely please contribute and submit feedback on GitHub, because this is evolving based on community efforts and based on community feedback. So any feedback or any bugs reported are very welcome. So please do write us and help us improve. Okay, and here's time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer and provide answers.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you say more about rendering of the controls? Because you mentioned that, for example, if you are using button, you are not using Android button and iOS button, but you are using low-level API to render it.
Yeah.
So can you say more about it? Do you draw it? Do you use simple primitive views? How does it look?
I will show you directly in the solution of Uno so that it's clear how it works. So here I will go to style generic XAML, I think that should be it. And here, let's see, target type. If you're familiar with Xamarin.Forms styles, it's very similar here. So this is the template for a button. As you can see, it contains a grid, which provides the background and border here. And there is a visual state manager, which allows for different states like pointer pressed, disabled, and so on. And there is a, this is not the, no, this is different template. I didn't want that. That's not the one I wanted. System resources, maybe that's it. Resources, no?
Yeah, good old times of Windows Phone development. You look at those files a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I made a mistake. It's button, not button. Okay. Now let's see. This one, yeah, the XAML default button. That's a default template, basically a copy-paste thing from UWP templates. And then you have the root grid, which provides the background and corner radius. And inside of it, you have content presenter. And content presenter knows how to render any content. So if you provide it a stack panel, it just renders the stack panel inside of the grid. So basically the primitive here is the grid, which provides the layout, and inside of it is content presenter, which renders the content. And when we go here in how the grid is implemented, you will be able to see how it actually does that. So here in UI, XAML controls grid. You can see that grid derives from a panel, and panel is actually here, which is a framework element, and framework element actually derives on each platform from a platform specific thing. So on iOS, it derives from a view. I'm not sure if I can show it here. Framework element, which should be here we go. Makes sense. Uno platform does a lot of cool code generation here. Actually, it generates some of the framework element properties and so on automatically using TT files. But that's not what I wanted to show you. It should be here probably. Framework element iOS. But the base is not visible here. Let's go here and maybe we'll see it here. If we go to
so basically you have the styles and you use them on each platform to use platform widgets to render them.
Yes. So if I go framework element, I can go to definition, and I'm currently on UWP, so that's not what I wanted. But if I go to iOS as the target platform, it should lead me to here. So it's UI element, and the base of it is bindable UI view, which is just a derived thing from UI view from iOS. Yes. So nice. This way it allows you to actually compose panels from Uno platform controls as well as native controls. And the same thing is on Android, and there is a special base class as well. If you go here, so if we go to the base and to the base, you can see bindable view, which is Uno view group, which is a view group from Android.
Yeah, nice. And another question, what if you would like to use a completely different look and feel? Because the native one is the one from UWP. But if you want, for example, use material design, so in Xamarin.Forms, we have the feature called visual, where you can turn on visual renderers. Is it something similar in Uno?
Yeah. In Uno platform,
or you have to just go on.
In Uno platform, you actually create a new style, and you can start with the style which is default, and you can add anything here. So if you want to display the button as a circle, you can just put in an ellipse and show it as a circle. You know, it's the advantage here is that the controls are templatable, so you can switch up the template completely, and the button will still provide the behavior of clicking, but you are in control of the view, of the look of the control itself. So instead of having a specific renderer, you have the complete template for yourself.
Okay. So you have to use the styles to mimic the material design look and feel, for example, or Fluent design.
Yes, but there is a way. I'm not sure how it's done right now, but there is a way even to set the default styles to match the platform-specific controls if you want to do so. And Jerome from Uno platform team was actually on Channel 9 with on Channel 9 Visual Studio Toolkit show. He was showing that he had an application where he had a checkbox which he clicked, and at runtime it just replaced those styles from Uno platform with styles that use the native button, for example. So you can mix up things however you like.
Okay, nice. And one more question regarding the UI things. You mentioned that you can use native buttons, Android, iOS buttons when you were showing WebAssembly Playground. Are those rendered the same way? So you have platform-specific styles, or for that case, they are using just Android button control or iOS button control? Or are those just the styles that's trying to look like Android button?
In this
or
case,
is it Android button?
Yeah, in this case, it's a style which looks like Android button.
Okay.
If you used it on Android, you could use just directly the Android style and use the native button there. But in this case, they had to like recreate those styles manually to show it in the browser.
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, it can be done because the XAML is very flexible, so you can quite easily make custom styles there, and you can make things look the same as on native platforms. As XAML is very flexible, as you definitely know if you used Xamarin.Forms, that you can do a lot of things with XAML, which are advanced, which are not easily done with the native UI platform. For example, if you go with XAML, it's a little bit more limited than XAML. So I think it's a nice thing to have.
Okay, I have a question. For example, if I would write a UVP application a few years ago, it would use some open source UI libraries, for example, for charts. What needs to be done that it would work?
Yeah. So if you're not using any UI library, it's very easy to copy paste the code, and hopefully it should run normally. If it's using some third-party libraries which are available, then you can use those. For example, those like Uno Windows Community Toolkit. Like there is a port of Windows Community Toolkit here, which is just a different NuGet package. I hope they are showing the right one here. No, so Uno Microsoft Toolkit. So it's the same namespace, but just the prefix is uno. And so you leave your UWP application as it is, and on Android, iOS, and WebAssembly, you reference this package instead. And once you do that, you should be okay and it should work. And when the UI libraries port is not yet provided, then there are two options. If it's open source, you can, clone the source code of the UI library and switch up the API, the references from UWP to UNO platform and compile it against UNO platform. And if it's not open source, then it's up to the library author to provide the port for UNO platform. For example, Syncfusion is currently working on UNO platform support, and they already showcased some of the graphs controls they have in UNO platform. I don't have the sample here, but it's just the same graph control which is on UWP, and it works in the browser as well.
Okay, so next question from me.
Mm-hmm.
As for hot restart and hot reload,
Mm-hmm.
hot reload, yeah. So it works only in browser for Blazor.
No, it actually works in all the platforms UNO platform supports. It's actually part of a package here. Not here. This is
Because
older.
in Xamarin.Forms it doesn't work for UWP.
Yeah, that's right. For UWP, you actually use the support which is in Visual Studio. So here you just edit the XAML and it should reload normally as UWP application. And when you are targeting iOS or Android, it's done by this UNO UI remote control package, which actually provides a connection between the application which is running and Visual Studio. So when you make a change, it sends the change to your emulator and renders this in the emulator. And this is done via WebSockets, so it should work on every new platform UNO platform supports. And even on macOS, there is already a rudimentary support for this.
So one more question regarding the hot reload. Does it also work for C# code or only XAML?
The C# code is supported, and so the changes that normally work, for example, if you are working with Xamarin.Forms application, you make some C# changes and then run it, continue running. The same changes will work as well. Like there is no limitation, and it should work with the same extent as in Xamarin.Forms. And I wanted to show you as well the hot restart, which is available in UNO platform as well. You have to currently add a reference to Xamarin.Forms there, which is only for the debug part of your application. And when you do this and add this special Forms application delegate, it actually allows you to do hot restart in UNO platform as well. And you can then connect your iPhone to the PC and compile it and run it without any Mac. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one last question from me. You showed that for a shared project you use shared project, which is the format, not the .NET Standard library.
Mm-hmm.
Can you switch to the .NET Standard library if you wish? So, for example, you don't want to use assets in the shared project, but per platform.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it's still an issue, but some time ago, shared project was very hard to unit test because, in fact, it's not a library, but just trick of a Visual Studio that takes this code and puts to all of the heads. So it copies this under the hood. So is it possible to use .NET Standard instead of shared, or use shared as a library that can be unit tested?
Yes, definitely. I can show you. There is this template, a cross-platform library, which is basically a library which it's not directly .NET Standard, as it's a multi-targeting library. So you have .NET Standard target, iOS target, Mono Android, and UWP. So it's a separate library which you can unit test, but it has platform-specific targeting. And the reason for that is that for each of the supported platforms, you have one of those targets. And .NET Standard one is for WebAssembly. Yeah. For future in .NET 5, it should be much easier to do this, but currently it is like this. So we have 4 different targets. But technically, you can just test against the .NET Standard one, as the Xamarin iOS, Android, and the UWP will be the same, basically. So yeah, it should work normally as you expect.
Yeah, nice.
The one thing you have to keep in mind when you're building the applications is that this drop down is very useful. You want to view the code as on UWP, for example, and if you are writing some platform specific code, you will have to do things like iOS, and you can write your platform specific code here. For example, I don't know, some UI application, for example, and this will be compiled only for iOS. So you use UIKit here, and on UWP it will be not compiled, right, like this. So you can easily mix up, shared code with platform-specific code. But the goal is, of course, to don't force you to write any platform-specific specifics and just use the UWP APIs. And a lot of those things are already working, like the sensors. So Windows devices sensors. There is, for example, accelerometer, and this is a cross-platform application implementation. So you can use it on iOS, Android, and UWP and WebAssembly normally as you would in UWP, and it will just work if you don't do anything like very advanced. Because some of the APIs of accelerometer, for example, are not available on WebAssembly. For example, the minimum report interval, you just cannot do that in the browser. So you cannot set this or get this value from the browser. So when you use this, Visual Studio will underline this API and say this is not actually working in the browser. So you shouldn't probably use it or use something else. Right? So if you have any other questions.
Yes, I have.
Yeah?
Okay. So, question was for resources and for navigations, 2 questions in fact. So resources, all resources will work as fonts on all platforms. For example, we have a font support since 4.5 in Xamarin.Forms, which doesn't work on UWP. And how it would work or not work here. So, for example, I have a custom font. Would it work out of the box on web?
Yes. So I will answer it in multiple steps. So for images, when you use the shared project, is the ideal situation. It automatically sorts out those assets and copies that to the native package or the application. So for images, I would probably use this SS folder. For other things like fonts, you will have to put those in the native folder. This is not yet done automatically. Maybe in the future it will. But for example, Uno platform uses this WinJS symbols font, which is for rendering icons. And they have it here. They have it in here, in the fonts folder. And the same thing is in UWP it uses the native Windows font, and in WebAssembly it's somewhere here. I'm not sure where here. Yeah, it's actually here in the WebAssembly part. It's embedded as the encoded base 64 of the font. And then when you do this, you can reference your font in XAML by writing normally font family, and then you'd go ms apex fonts something dot ttf, and it actually looks for this font in the native library. So it goes here and finds it here, or in the resources folder in iOS, and so on. So fonts are done this way, and for other resources like images and videos, those should be also put in the platform specific folders, but you can still reference them using this shared URI format of ms apex and then some subfolder and so on.
Okay. And the second question about navigation between multiple pages. So now it's in progress, yes, with the Prism library, or no?
You can
It's
normally
out of the box. The navigation, passing parameters, the whole beauty of MVMs.
it is possible normally to navigate. UWP uses a frame control, which is for navigation, and you just go frame navigate some other page, some page, and you can pass parameters here, so 13 for example. So this will navigate to a second page, and then on the second page you override on navigated to, and then take the E parameter, which is your passed in parameter. This works the same way as in UWP, so there should be any difference. And you can do back navigation as well. And for Android, where you have the back button on the phone, you can actually handle System Navigation Manager. Here, which is also UWP class, which is from the times of Windows Phone, and when you have the back button in the title bar, and you just handle the back requested event. So when you handle this event, then in Android it will be fired when the user uses back button on the phone, and in the browser it will be fired when the user clicks on the back button in the navigation bar.
Okay, nice. So I have a third question.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, because as we are for these external libraries, for example, a few days ago I saw some tweet about Blazor and LightDB. So I'm thinking how, for example, local storage would be done on Blazor on this web part.
Local storage, you mean like settings, or?
Yeah, like storing data on browser.
Like for simple data, for example, user preferences, you can use the application data API, which provides you with local settings, and you can add some, like values. You can add some key and value pair and just store it. And you can also use local folder, which is a folder for files. And in case of WebAssembly, the file system support is very limited. but it does work, so you can use this to write a file there. And yeah, in case of for the implementation, I have actually a older slide here, I think. Here for settings, for example, which is this application data, it uses the platform-specific APIs there underneath. So you just use the UWP API, and on iOS it uses NSUser defaults, on Android share preferences, and on WebAssembly it's using IndexedDB to store the settings.
Great. That's all from me. Anyone else?
Definitely ask anything you want. Happy to answer. Nothing?
So maybe how about startup performance on Android, which on Forms is a controversial topic.
Yeah, it's a controversial topic in UNO platform as well. It's comparable to Xamarin.Forms, and I expect a lot of improvements when .NET 5 comes around. Because it will be targeting .NET Core, and that should definitely improve things a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, but it currently is very similar to Xamarin.Forms.
Yeah, in fact, I had a question about .NET 5, but in fact you answered because you said as for local resources and essentials from Xamarin, they have to be targeted to .NET 5, and if they do, the UNO will also work.
Yes, UWP doesn't support .NET Core, which is a little bit problematic. But once WinUI 3 comes, it will, once .NET 5 comes, there is expected that UWP will be supporting .NET Core 5 as well. So we just have to wait and hope that the Windows team will make it in time. But otherwise, UNO platform will support .NET 5 normally and will definitely work the same way.
Okay, so a lot of great stuff here presented. You probably make us hungry for more UNO. We should try it.
Yeah, you definitely try it. I'm not saying it's, you have to use it. I'm not saying Xamarin.Forms is it's better than Xamarin.Forms. It's an alternative, and I think it's good to have two different platforms that are improving each other. And I think it's targeting a little different group of developers. As one group wants native look on each platform, then you probably have easier to start with Xamarin.Forms. But if you want the same look and more customizability, then you go with UNO platform. And if you want to use the browser and target the browser, then UNO platform can provide you the WebAssembly head for Xamarin.Forms as well. So it's like pick and choose what you like, and that's the best thing that can happen.
Yes, mostly I'm interested with UNO because of the old projects. I and Martin came from Windows Phone world, and those products were very good. Nevertheless, market wasn't ready for that, and
Right.
we landed in Xamarin world. Nevertheless, the code base on those projects is very modern, but can be maybe moved to UNO.
Yeah, I'm sure that I've ported one of my applications from Windows Phone times to UNO platform and published it on Android and iOS, and it was like really little change that was required. I just had to change the native ad control, which was on Windows, to Google Ads. But otherwise, it's just the same code, same XAML, and it's working everywhere. So yeah, it's nice to have this portability story from existing projects to Uno platform.
Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, Martin, do you have any?
Yeah. Do you know any existing themes for the Uno platform? So I will again mention material design, which is these days very basic for every UI designs. Are there any, for example, styles that you shown styled for material design on the web?
Actually,
Do you know some?
not sure if there's something like that already for Uno platform, but if you take something like this for UWP, you should be able to just copy paste those styles and use it in Uno platform.
Yeah,
Like that,
yes.
I'm sure there are some of those styles already done for UWP, so those can be used in Uno platform most likely without significant changes. So if you find those, then you can use those definitely.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Probably won't find anything right now, but yeah, you can find those definitely. And if it's open source, the portability story to Uno platform should be quite easy.
Okay, I have no other questions.
Okay.
For me, I just would like to say you, Martin, thanks, really thanks for the awesome presentation, good answers for all our questions. And really be cool if you could grab you for some beer, maybe in the autumn when all that epidemic will finish, all that restriction connected with coronavirus.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm looking forward to that.
Really awesome.
And actually, there will be Uno platform conference. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but
You mentioned at the end of September.
it's gonna be. It was supposed to be in Canada, but it's gonna be online. So definitely, it's gonna be a lot of good stuff there. So if you want to join that, it's gonna be on YouTube or some other live streaming platform. So for news on Uno platform, you can await those at UnoConf.
Okay, cool that we could join from Rzeszów even. Also, at a Zoom chat, Christian Przybyłek tell you thanks for a great time and great presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. Right.
Okay, so what? Maybe last question. So how the company Uno works? Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
How's your story with it? How did you start?
Yeah, Uno as a Uno platform is like open source and it's available for free. The company behind it is Inventive, which is based in Canada, and they actually use Uno platform in their client application projects where they build applications for, they have a lot of clients and they use it in production, and they originally used it for themselves and they didn't just realize that it would be probably useful for others and they open sourced it. So they like make money on this, on the professional support and first party support for companies, but otherwise it's free and available for use for everyone. And I actually started using it as a UWP developer, original Windows Phone developer, who really likes the APIs from Windows, and I always prefer those to the native iOS and Android APIs. So I was always looking for something like this, and Uno platform is just a natural way to write Windows applications everywhere. So I started contributing, and It is a lot of fun, and you always learn something new with the team, because those are very smart people behind the project, and there is a lot of cool magic happening in the code base. So it's definitely a good experience to try to implement something small in Uno platform, definitely, because you get to see how it all works, how it all fits together, and all the moving parts that come into it.
Okay. How was your first commit?
My first commit, actually, it was last year. It's actually almost exactly 1 year ago, and it was actually implementation of the and it was implementation of the display information API, which provides information about the size of the screen and orientation and so on. This was just documentation, but this one is like implementing the screen height, screen width, diagonal size in inches, and so on. And it was the first PR that got me hooked on this, and since then I was implementing a lot of APIs like the sensors and a jump list support for the applications, and I actually added the dark theme support for switching between light and dark. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. You always find something that's missing for you, and you just implement it. For example, in my application, the SMS ticket, which is for buying public transportation tickets by SMS, I needed to add the functionality to show the compose SMS message, and that was missing. So I added a PR for it, and I implemented it on all the platforms. So that's just one of the PRs, and it's really fun to figure out how the platform-specific APIs can map to Windows, and how to hide those platform specifics behind the Windows API.
So to do first PR, you have to do the fork, and
you just fork it in here, and you can then you don't have to fork it. You can even contribute by using the Git-bot functionality, but maybe you can log in with GitHub and show you if it loads here. Oh, of course, authentication. But if you fork it, you just clone it on your local device, and there is actually a documentation how to get started with contributing, which is available in the repo, and it's even I have also written on my blog it's maybe contributing to platform. Yeah, this one. I've written a series of blog posts on this, on how you start on contributing, how to clone the repo, how to build it, and it actually shows the samples application, which is a application which Uno platform uses to perform UI tests on their controls and to check everything works the same on Android, iOS, and WebAssembly as on UWP. So when you are contributing, you will get access to this special application, which allows you to test things and implement new features and test them in a visual manner. Still launching. It takes a while to launch it for the first time. So yeah, if you want to contribute, then this blog post should be like a walkthrough through the basics of how the solution is structured and what's happening when you build it and so on. And one more thing I can show you probably here, because I didn't explain how actually Uno platform team makes sure that the APIs and the namespaces and everything is in sync with UWP. They have a generator, since generator here, which is a console application which takes the UWP APIs and then compares those to what's in UNO platform and generates backing classes for things that are not yet implemented. So when a new version of Windows comes out, they run this and it generates these generated classes. And for things that are not implemented, for example, drag UI is not implemented, then it generates this API which says that if it's not implemented, it raises not implemented exception, and there are these like platform-specific flags. And when something is implemented, then you just remove the flag from the generated code. Not here probably, but in the UNO UI. For example, let's say button is a good example. Button. Yeah, so you just remove the code that's already implemented, and then you implement it in the platform-specific manner. Yeah. So that's how platform makes sure that things are always in sync with Windows, and that it always shows the right information when something is not yet implemented, and you always see it with the platform analyzer at code time. So, for example, here in Accelerometer is implemented on iOS, Android, and WebAssembly, but it's not implemented on macOS. So macOS is here, and it makes sure that for macOS it just throws the not implemented exception, and the analyzer recognizes this attribute and shows it. Yeah. So let's see. It's loaded. So here, as you can see, it's running in the browser, the UNO platform solution, and you can actually build UNO platform solution in the browser and run it there. Maybe we will be able to do it now. Let's see. Build the sources. Let's see if build gitpod WASM. Let's see if it works. This actually builds the WebAssembly solution in the browser. You cannot build Android and iOS in the browser yet, but at least WebAssembly is there. Let's see. It might take a while. So you can ask another question if you, in the meantime, until it builds.
So guys on chat are writing that the SMS ticket is on showcases.
Once again, please.
Check SMS tickets are on showcases.
Yeah, it's there. It's one of those. Yeah, it's actually even in the store, so you can try it out. But in the showcases, there is a lot of other. Oh, not this, but not from that. There is a lot of other applications that they have built, and these are actually ones that UNO platform team themselves built for their clients, for example. So, yeah, this is very cool example of it's a pixel art editor which runs on Android and Windows, and it was actually a UWP application which the developer ported to Android using UNO platform. Still building. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, but I should leave this call right now because I have some stuff to do. One more time, Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bogdan, to grab Martin. Would like to see you, Martin, visible in Krakow, as I mentioned earlier. Thanks everyone who joined us today. Hope to see you next time.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you have time, you can definitely try it out in the browser.
Sure.
It should finish building, and then you can just launch the application as a browser window. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.